You won't believe what happened next. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The Billionaire's Secret and the Cafe Owner. Imagine this: a man worth billions, a titan of industry whose name echoed through every skyscraper in London, stood trembling, utterly helpless, as his own child's heart broke, a sound that pierced deeper than any market crash. He had everything money could buy: power, influence, endless luxury. Yet, at his darkest hour, the only person who could offer a glimmer of hope was a struggling single mother from the city's forgotten corners, whose humble cafe was barely clinging to life. What would you do if your vast empire couldn't solve your deepest, most heartbreaking problem? The rain had let up just enough for the clouds to hang heavy and low, smearing the sky in a dull gray that matched the concrete beneath his boots. Ethan Price stood on the edge of the sidewalk, holding the passenger door open, as his daughter Chloe carefully stepped out of their faded sedan. She was dressed in a soft lavender dress he'd found at a second-hand store 3 weeks ago. He'd spent an hour sewing up a loose hem the night before. Her hair was braided just the way she liked it, and she clutched a tiny handmade purse to her chest like it was treasure. Ethan tugged at the collar of his button-up, one of only 2 he owned that didn't have oil stains. He had pressed it that morning with a damp towel and an iron that sparked every time it plugged into the wall. His boots were clean, scuffed, but polished. His hands, rough from years under hoods and gears, still bore the signs of a working man, no matter how much soap he'd scrubbed into them. He looked up at the glowing gold script above the door, the gilded spoon. It was the kind of place people whispered about in his town, the kind of place reserved for celebrations with fine wine and reservations booked weeks in advance. But tonight wasn't about indulgence. It was about a little girl who deserved to feel like the world had magic in it. She had turned 10, and she wanted to feel like a princess. As they stepped inside, the warmth of the restaurant hit them immediately. Rich aromas of truffle oil and roasted duck, candlelight flickering off crystal glassware. Conversations were soft, refined. Waiters glided across the floor in pressed uniforms. Ethan glanced around, gently guiding Chloe toward the front desk. The maitre d' saw them before they said a word. His eyes scanned Ethan's thrifted shirt, lingered a second too long on Chloe's simple dress, then flicked back up to Ethan's unshaven jaw. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" the man asked, already knowing the answer he intended to give. Ethan straightened. "We have a reservation, for Price, 7 o'clock. The maitre d' glanced at the book, then closed it with a snap. "I'm afraid there's been a mistake. We have no record of that." Ethan's brow furrowed. "I called 3 days ago. Spoke to someone named Richard." "Richard no longer works here," the man said coolly. "And even if he did, we have a strict dress code." He said it slowly, like each word was meant to bruise. Ethan glanced down at Chloe, who was looking up at him with a confused smile. She didn't understand yet, but he did. He understood completely, and his stomach dropped. Ethan clenched his jaw, but he forced a calm smile for Chloe's sake. She was still holding his hand. Still hopeful, still believing in the magic of birthday wishes and fancy restaurants with sparkling chandeliers. He couldn't let it all crash down. Not yet. There must be some way, Ethan started, but the maitre d' raised a hand, not with kindness, but dismissal. "We're at full capacity this evening," he said, with syrupy politeness that dripped with condescension. "Even if your name were in the book, which it isn't, I'm afraid we cannot seat guests who fail to meet our dress code." Chloe looked up at her dad. "Did we do something wrong?" The words pierced Ethan deeper than he expected. She wasn't crying, but her voice was small now, fragile, like she was beginning to understand that sometimes the world doesn't work the way it should, not even on your birthday. "No, sweetheart," Ethan said, crouching to meet her eyes. "You look beautiful. You did everything perfect." Behind them, someone laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but enough for Ethan to hear the snide amusement in it. A couple dressed in sleek black and deep red passed by, giving him a once-over. He could feel the judgment crawling over his back like static, his face flushed with heat. He stood, turning back to the maitre d', who now wore the expression of someone tolerating a nuisance. "I just wanted one nice night for her, that's all," Ethan said, voice low, steady. "She's 10. It's her birthday." The maitre d' leaned in just a little, lowering his tone to something meant only for Ethan. "And that's very sweet. But if you want your daughter to enjoy a place like this, maybe start by bringing her somewhere that fits your bracket." Ethan's hand curled into a fist before he could think. For a second, the thought flared. Just one punch, just enough to wipe that smug smirk off his face. But then Chloe tugged his sleeve. "Dad, it's okay," she whispered. She was trying to be brave, to protect him from feeling bad. He swallowed hard, blinking away the burn in his eyes. "Come on, kiddo," he said softly. "Let's find another place." But before he could turn toward the door, a voice from behind them cut through the tension like a blade dipped in honey. "Excuse me," it said, calm, poised, unmistakably powerful. "I believe you made a mistake." And every eye in the room turned. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, the kind that makes every clink of silverware sound like thunder. Ethan turned, startled, and saw her, standing there. The woman's presence hit harder than her words. She was tall, elegant, with a tailored emerald dress that shimmered beneath the ambient light like forest leaves in moonlight. Her hair was swept back in a low knot, her makeup soft but flawless, her posture regal without being arrogant. She wasn't just beautiful, she was commanding. The maitre d' blinked, and for a moment the mask slipped. "Miss Alistair," he stammered, his tone suddenly deferential. "I was watching," she said, cutting him off with the kind of politeness that left no room for argument. "And I'd like to clarify something. This man and his daughter were just turned away for not being dressed appropriately." The maitre d' straightened his spine, desperate to regain control. "I was merely following policy." "Then perhaps your policy needs re-examination," she said flatly. Her gaze never left his face. "Because the only thing I saw was a father trying to do something kind for his child, and a little girl who looked like she belonged in a fairy tale." Ethan didn't know what to say. He felt Chloe's small hand tighten around his. Her eyes were wide now, not with confusion, but wonder. "Please," the woman continued, turning toward Ethan. Her voice softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. "Won't you join me? My table is right over there. There's plenty of room." Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. He felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. "We don't want to intrude," he said quietly, instinctively shielding Chloe from more embarrassment. "It wouldn't be an intrusion," she said gently. "It would be an honor." The maitre d' stood frozen, caught between protocol and power. Miss Alistair gave him a look that made her expectations clear. Without another word, he stepped aside. Ethan hesitated for just a moment longer, then looked down at Chloe. Her face was glowing, not just with joy, but with hope. "Okay," he said, his voice low. "Still uncertain, if you're sure." "I'm sure," the woman replied, smiling now. "Come, the night is young, and no little girl should feel small on her birthday." And with that, she led them through the restaurant, not as guests being tolerated, but as people worth noticing. The clink of glasses and murmur of hushed conversation returned slowly as they crossed the restaurant floor. But the air still carried a crackle, the kind that follows a sudden shift in power. Ethan could feel the eyes on his back, curious, judgmental, some even embarrassed for having watched the scene unfold without lifting a finger. He kept his gaze ahead, trying to match the pace of the woman who'd just intervened in his worst moment with effortless poise. They arrived at a round corner table draped in cream linen and bathed in the warm glow of a nearby chandelier. Chloe's eyes lit up. A candle flickered gently in the center of the table, surrounded by delicate porcelain dishes and folded napkins that looked too fancy to touch. "Here," the woman said softly, pulling out a chair for Chloe. "This seat is reserved for the birthday girl." Chloe hesitated, looking to her father, who nodded. She slid into the chair, her posture suddenly more upright, as if trying to match the elegance around her. Ethan took the seat across from her, his hand stiff in his lap, heart still racing. The woman sat last, unhurried, as though none of what just happened had shaken her. "Thank you," Ethan said finally, his voice quiet but raw. "You didn't have to do that." "No," she agreed, "but someone did." She reached for the wine list and paused. "Vivian Alistair," she said, extending a graceful hand across the table. "Ethan Price," he replied, shaking it lightly. Still unsure if any of this was real, a waiter appeared seconds later, suddenly far more attentive than before. Vivian spoke first. "We'll start with sparkling water and a lemonade. Extra lemon slices for our guest of honor." Chloe beamed, her fingers now toying with the edges of her napkin. The waiter nodded, retreating swiftly. Vivian turned back to Ethan. "I know what it's like to grow up being told you don't belong in places like this," she said, her voice quieter now, almost as if she was speaking to herself. "But I also know what it means when someone holds a door open anyway." Ethan looked across the table at his daughter, smiling now, eyes wide with awe, and felt something shift. He didn't know what this night was turning into, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like he was carrying the weight alone. Have you ever witnessed an act of unexpected kindness that completely changed a situation? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more uplifting tales. A night of unexpected connections. Chloe sat with both hands wrapped around the chilled glass in front of her, eyes locked on the sparkling drink with floating lemon slices and a tiny umbrella perched like royalty. She sipped it slowly, cautiously, as if afraid it might vanish if she wasn't careful. Ethan watched her, a soft smile flickering through the weight still anchored in his chest. Vivian leaned back slightly, studying him without judgment. "You looked like you were about to throw a punch back there," she said, not as a challenge, but with a trace of amusement. He met her eyes and exhaled, the tension barely beginning to fade. "I was close. No shame in it," she said, folding her hands on the table. "But I'm glad you didn't. He wasn't worth it." Ethan nodded, glancing around the restaurant again. The decor was stunning. Marble floors, crown molding, fresh flowers at every table. And yet the beauty of it all couldn't hide the unease he felt in a place like this. Every movement felt too loud, too unsure. He caught a woman at another table, whispering behind a hand. Whether she was talking about them or not, he didn't care. It felt the same. "Dana, I tried to give her something special," he said, his voice thick. "She talks about this place all the time. Thought it'd be a nice surprise." "It still can be," Vivian replied softly. "She's smiling. That's what she'll remember." Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not used to being noticed. Not like that." Vivian tilted her head. "You mean judged?" He nodded. "You get used to it," she said. But there was something in her tone, a shadow, a flicker, that told him she hadn't. Not really. The waiter returned with a basket of bread and an appetizer plate. Chloe's face lit up again as Vivian gently guided her through the menu, pointing out dishes like it was an adventure. Ethan sat back, watching them interact. Something about the way Vivian spoke to his daughter, not down to her, not with sugary sweetness, but with genuine interest, hit him harder than he expected. She didn't see them as a project or a pity story, not a man out of place or a girl from the wrong side of town. She just saw them, and for the first time since he walked through those doors, Ethan began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they belonged. The food arrived in waves, each plate more elegant than the last. Ethan had never seen dishes like this up close. Tiny, edible flowers, sauces drizzled like artwork, portions arranged with surgical precision. Chloe's eyes lit up with every course, treating each new plate like a gift. She asked what everything was, and Vivian answered with ease, describing textures and ingredients like she'd been born into a world where menus didn't need prices. And maybe she had. Ethan poked at his own food carefully. It was delicious, far beyond anything he'd tasted before, but he couldn't quite relax. Not fully. There was a knot in his chest that refused to loosen, no matter how kind Vivian was, no matter how bright Chloe smiled. The kind of knot that grows when you've been turned away too many times, when dignity becomes something you have to guard more than your wallet. You don't have to keep your guard up, Vivian said gently, not looking directly at him. She was helping Chloe cut a piece of her entree. I promise, no one here is going to laugh at you. Ethan glanced around again. The maitre d' had vanished, replaced by a more cheerful waiter, who now treated them like royalty. Other guests had gone back to their wine and conversation, but the humiliation lingered, clinging to his skin like a second coat. I've learned not to trust charity, he muttered. People don't give without wanting something. Vivian raised her eyes to meet his. And do you think that's what this is? A transaction? I don't know what this is, Ethan admitted, his voice sharper than he meant it to be. You see a guy getting humiliated in a restaurant and suddenly you're, what, saving the night? There was a long pause. Chloe looked between them, sensing the tension, shrinking slightly in her seat. Vivian didn't flinch. You're allowed to be angry, she said. But don't take it out on me. I didn't cause that moment at the door. I only refuse to let it be the end of your evening. Ethan let out a slow breath. Shame crept up his neck. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm not used to this kind of kindness, especially not from someone like you. Vivian leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. Someone like me? Someone who doesn't have to care. She paused for a moment, her expression softening. Maybe I do, she said quietly. More than you know. The tension softened like a door slowly swinging open. Vivian reached for her wine, taking a slow sip, her eyes drifting to Chloe, who was now nibbling at a pastry from the dessert tray, the earlier discomfort forgotten under powdered sugar and giggles. Ethan watched her, watched both of them, and something inside him cracked a little, not in a painful way, more like a dam loosening after holding back too much for too long. You said something earlier, he murmured, eyes still on his daughter, about knowing what it's like to be told you don't belong. Vivian's gaze didn't falter. I did. Doesn't look like it now. No, she agreed. Not anymore. Remember, Ethan looked at her then. Really looked. She didn't carry herself like someone pretending. She wasn't playing savior. She was composed, yes, but there was something behind her calm, something that came from surviving, not inheriting. I was raised by my grandmother, she said, answering the question he hadn't voiced. In a neighborhood where landlords didn't fix anything unless someone threatened to sue. I got my first job bussing tables at 13. My first suit came from a consignment store. I wore it until the elbows thinned. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. And now you're on the board of 3 companies, own a small equity firm. She added quickly, I don't say that to impress you. I say it so you understand that I've been in rooms where people looked at me like I didn't belong, and I've also been in rooms where they pretended I did, until I made a decision they didn't like. Ethan leaned back in his chair, processing her words. He wasn't sure what he had expected from her. Maybe a polished story with just enough edge to sound humble. But that wasn't what she gave. She offered honesty without needing him to validate it. Chloe looked up suddenly. "Dad, can we come back here again someday?" Ethan smiled at her, but there was sadness tucked in the corners of it. "Maybe, kiddo." Vivian's voice was steady. "You'll come back, and next time you won't need me to walk you in." What do you think will happen next? Will Ethan and Chloe return to the Gilded Spoon? Share your predictions in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more heartwarming stories. A glimpse behind the velvet rope. By the time dessert arrived, a triple-layer chocolate torte with gold flakes, Chloe swore looked like real treasure. The mood at the table had shifted. The heaviness of earlier had peeled away, layer by layer, replaced with cautious ease. Chloe was laughing again, her cheeks dusted with sugar, and Vivian listened closely to every rambling story she told, as if nothing else in the world mattered more than the thoughts of a 10-year-old girl in a lavender dress. Ethan remained quieter, not because he wasn't grateful, but because gratitude came tangled with disbelief. It felt like they'd stepped into someone else's life for the night. Someone richer, luckier, someone who didn't have to count petrol miles or fold notes before handing them to a cashier. He kept waiting for the spell to break. "I don't want this to be weird," Vivian said softly, interrupting the silence that followed one of Chloe's stories. She was looking at Ethan now, her voice lower, almost shy. "I didn't mean to embarrass you back there. I just couldn't sit still and watch that happen." Ethan shook his head. "You didn't embarrass me." "He did." "Still," she said, "you handled it better than most people would." He looked down at his hands, still calloused from the garage. "I've had practice." She tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "You've raised her on your own? Since she was 3? What happened, if you don't mind me asking?" He hesitated. The question was simple, but the answer never was. Her mother left, said she needed to find herself, but she never looked back. No calls, no birthdays, just gone. Vivian didn't reply right away. She didn't offer pity either, just silence that didn't feel empty. "I don't think I could have done what you did," she said finally. "Not alone." Ethan looked at her across the table. Her sincerity didn't waver. And for the first time that evening, he felt something settle deep in his chest. Not comfort exactly, but the recognition of another soul who knew how much it cost to keep standing when the world tried to knock you flat. And maybe that was rarer than all the money in the room. The check never came. Ethan had been bracing for it all evening, running the silent math in his head, calculating what he'd pay with card and what he'd beg them to accept in cash. But when the waiter returned, he simply smiled at Vivian, gave a slight nod, and walked away. No leather folder, no bill, no hesitation. Ethan stared at the empty space on the table, his brows pulling together. "You paid already." Vivian took a final sip of her wine, setting the glass down with a soft clink. "I did." He leaned forward, his voice quiet, but firm. "I was going to cover what I could. I didn't bring us here to have someone else foot the bill." "I know you didn't," she said, her tone calm. "That's exactly why I wanted to." He didn't respond right away, his pride tangled with his gratitude, choking his throat before he could find the right words. Chloe, oblivious to the adult undercurrents, was now preoccupied with licking frosting off her spoon and humming a tune to herself. "It's not that I'm ungrateful," Ethan said finally. "It's just, I'm not used to being the one who gets rescued." Vivian met his gaze without blinking. "Then maybe it's time someone did." That landed heavier than anything else she'd said all night, not because of the words themselves, but because of how gently she delivered them, like she wasn't trying to win something or assert control, but offer something she rarely offered at all. The moment stretched between them, soft and tentative, until Chloe let out a dramatic sigh. "I don't want to leave." Ethan smiled and reached across the table, brushing a crumb from her cheek. "It's getting late, sweetheart." Vivian stood, smoothing her dress. "I'll have my driver bring the car around. I'd be happy to give you both a ride." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but Chloe's eyes lit up so brightly that he stopped himself. He hesitated, then nodded. "All right, just this once. It's this." As they walked toward the exit together, Ethan looked over his shoulder. The maitre d' was nowhere in sight, but the memory of his sneer still burned. This time, though, Ethan wasn't leaving with shame in his chest. He was leaving with his daughter's laughter and the echo of a stranger's kindness that somehow didn't feel so strange anymore. The car was unlike anything Ethan had ever ridden in. Sleek, black, with interior leather that felt softer than anything he owned in his flat. The moment the driver opened the door, Chloe gasped audibly and whispered, "Is this a spaceship?" before climbing in like she was stepping onto a throne. Ethan followed behind her, slowly, still not sure if he belonged in the world Vivian lived in, even for the length of a car ride. Vivian slid in beside them with effortless grace, the door shut, muffling the noise of the city, leaving only the quiet hum of the engine and the soft instrumental music playing from invisible speakers. "Where to?" the driver asked. Ethan hesitated, instinctively guarding his pride. "Just the corner of Bond Street and Telford Road. We'll walk from there." Vivian raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She gave a small nod to the driver, who eased the car away from the curb like it weighed nothing. The city blurred past in gold-lit streaks. Chloe sat between them, legs swinging, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. He could feel her relax completely for the first time all day, her tiny body warm against his. Vivian broke the silence. "Do you work in auto repair?" Ethan looked over. "Yeah, small garage near the train tracks. Been there 7 years. "You own it," he laughed quietly. "I barely own my toolbox. It's my boss's place. I do whatever comes in. Brake jobs, diagnostics, a lot of patchwork lately." "You're good at it," he shrugged. "I keep cars on the road. People who can't afford dealerships usually come to me." Vivian nodded slowly. "That's a skill, one that doesn't get nearly enough respect." He studied her for a second. "You always ride around saving mechanics from rude maitre d's?" She smiled faintly. "Only the ones who teach their daughters to hold their heads high, even when the world tries to lower them." Ethan didn't know how to respond to that. He turned his face toward the window, the blur of lights washing over his features. It had been a long time since someone saw worth in him without asking for something in return. And as the car rolled toward the edge of his neighborhood, he realized he didn't want the night to end. Not yet. What do you think Vivian sees in Ethan that he doesn't see in himself? Share your insights in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more amazing stories. A glimpse of home. A glimpse of truth. The car slowed at the corner of Bond Street and Telford Road, where the shine of the city lights faded into a street lined with worn brick buildings and uneven pavements. The kind of neighborhood where porch lights flickered and kids played ball in car parks. Not because it was safe, but because it was all they had. It wasn't dangerous, just forgotten. The kind of place people like Vivian didn't usually visit, much less park in. The driver turned his head toward the back seat. "Here, sir." Ethan hesitated. He glanced at Chloe, now dozing lightly against his arm, her birthday dress wrinkled, her curls pressed flat on one side from resting against his shoulder. Vivian was watching him. She hadn't said a word since the last intersection, but her silence wasn't empty. It felt patient, intentional. "We can walk from here," he said quietly. "I don't want her seeing where we live, and thinking we don't belong in places like the one you took us tonight. Vivian's brow furrowed just slightly. What if she saw where she lived and still believed she belonged everywhere? Ethan looked away, jaw tight. Kids don't hold on to fairy tales forever. Sooner or later the world teaches them the truth. And maybe, Vivian said, that's why they need people who show them a different truth while they're still young enough to believe it. For a moment, the only sound was the engine idling. Ethan gently shifted Chloe, sliding out of the seat with her still in his arms. She stirred but didn't wake, her hand curling against his chest, like she used to when she was little. Vivian stepped out too, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She stood there in that emerald dress, completely out of place on a street like this. Yet she didn't flinch, didn't fidget. Just watched them like she belonged there with them too. I don't usually let people in, Ethan said, adjusting Chloe in his arms. Too many don't know how to stay. I'm not most people, Vivian replied. He nodded once. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, You want to walk us to the door? Vivian smiled and without hesitation fell into step beside him. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and floor polish, the kind they used in bulk to cover years of wear without ever fixing the damage underneath. The apartment door creaked as Ethan unlocked it, nudging it open with his shoulder while balancing Chloe against his chest. The lights flickered as they stepped inside, one bulb working, the other humming weakly in protest. Sorry, he muttered, gesturing toward the small living room. It's not much. Vivian stepped in carefully, her heels clicking softly against the warped linoleum. She didn't look uncomfortable, didn't wrinkle her nose or try to mask polite surprise. Instead, she turned slowly, taking it all in. The thrifted couch with a worn blanket folded neatly on one side, the shelves cluttered with coloring books and tiny hand-drawn pictures taped to the wall, a coat rack made from old wrenches bolted to the door frame. She noticed the details, not the lack of luxury, but the presence of love. You built this, she said almost to herself. Ethan looked at her warily. It's just home. He carried Chloe to her bedroom, a tiny space painted sky blue with glow-in-the-dark stars, still clinging to the ceiling from years ago. He laid her gently onto the bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin. She murmured something in her sleep, her hand reaching out, and he caught it instinctively, brushing her fingers with his own before slipping away. When he returned to the living room, Vivian was standing by the wall of drawings. One stood out, stick figures, one tall, one small, holding hands under a sun with smiling rays. The taller figure had what appeared to be car tools scribbled beside it. Me and Daddy at the shop, she read aloud, a quiet smile forming. She loves you so deeply. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. She's the reason I get up in the morning. You do more than get up, Vivian said, turning to face him. You keep going, with everything stacked against you. That's not common, Ethan. That's rare. He let out a breath, unsure of what to say. He wasn't used to being seen so clearly. It felt disarming, and for the first time all night, the silence between them felt like something he didn't want to end. Ethan moved to the kitchen, more out of nervous habit than necessity. The space was cramped, with counters that had seen better decades, and a kettle that whined like a wounded animal when it boiled. He filled it anyway, setting it on the burner, without asking if she even wanted tea. He needed something to do with his hands. Vivian followed him, her presence soft but steady. She didn't hover or fill the air with small talk. Instead, she leaned against the doorway, watching him with that same calm gaze she'd worn all night, like she saw things no one else bothered to notice. You're quiet, she said gently. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. I'm still trying to figure out what tonight was. She gave a slight smile. A birthday dinner. He let out a dry laugh, not bitter, just tired. Felt like a rescue mission. You think that's a bad thing? I think I've spent too many years teaching myself not to need saving. Vivian stepped into the kitchen now, closer. The light above flickered once before settling. Needing help doesn't make you weak, Ethan. It just makes you human. He looked at her then. Really looked. She wasn't just some woman in an expensive dress who'd played hero for the night. There was something else, something unspoken, but familiar. A resilience, a loneliness. "You ever get tired of pretending you're fine all the time?" he asked. Vivian's jaw tensed slightly, and her eyes darted down before meeting his again. "Every day." The kettle whistled softly, the sound rising like tension breaking. Ethan moved to silence it, pouring the hot water into 2 mismatched mugs. No honey, no lemon, just plain black tea and shared exhaustion. He handed her a mug, their fingers brushing for the first time. The touch was brief, but electric, a jolt of something neither of them had prepared for. Vivian held his gaze longer than she should have. "You didn't have to let me in tonight," she said. "I didn't," he replied. "But something told me I'd regret it if I didn't." For once the risk felt worth it, and in the quiet that followed, neither of them moved to break it. What do you think will happen when 2 people from such different worlds collide? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the next part of their journey. The dance of 2 worlds. The tea went cold between them, forgotten on the counter as time stretched. Neither of them made a move to sit. They just stood there, caught in a current too strong to ignore, but too uncertain to name. Ethan leaned against the edge of the counter, arms crossed, the dim kitchen light casting shadows across his jaw. Vivian stood across from him, holding the mug she no longer sipped, her expression unreadable, but far from indifferent. He spoke first. "So what happens now?" Vivian looked up, surprised by the question, but not unprepared. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you don't live in this world. This." He motioned to the kitchen, to the creaky floorboards, to the quiet hum of a life that had learned how to stretch every pound. "This isn't your orbit." She tilted her head. "Maybe I don't want to live in an orbit anymore." He narrowed his eyes slightly. "People like you?" "Don't fall into people like you," she finished for him. "Is that what you think this was?" Ethan hesitated. "I think it's easy to get swept up in a moment, and I think when that moment ends, people return to their own." Vivian stepped forward then, slow and deliberate. "You think I did all of this because I felt sorry for you?" He didn't answer. "I didn't." He exhaled through his nose, fighting the storm building in his chest. "Then why?" "Because you didn't ask for anything. Because you were the only one in that restaurant who held his dignity while being told he didn't belong. Because your daughter smiled through it anyway. And because when I saw you, I saw someone who reminds me of myself." Ethan searched her eyes for anything false, anything rehearsed. But all he found was honesty. "I'm not looking for a fairy tale, Ethan. I'm not offering one," she said. "I'm offering real." That word lingered in the room longer than it should have. Real. He looked down at his hands, still stained faintly with engine grease. "I don't know if I know how to do real anymore." She stepped closer, only inches between them now. "Then maybe we start there." The air between them had changed. It wasn't filled with electricity anymore. It was heavier now, denser, like 2 people standing on the edge of something and trying to decide if the fall would be worth it. Ethan looked away first, not because he didn't believe her, but because he wanted to. And that scared him more than anything. He picked up his cold mug and poured it out in the sink. The splash of tea was louder than it should have been in the quiet. His back was to her, but he could feel her watching, waiting. He dried his hands with the same towel he always used, thin frayed, familiar, and leaned against the sink. "I don't know how to let people in without bracing for the moment they leave," he said. Vivian's voice came softly behind him. "That's not trust. That's trauma." He turned slowly. Her words had hit a nerve, not because they were harsh, but because they were right. He'd spent years building a life made of caution, calculated warmth, letting people close enough to wave, but never far enough in to stay. "I don't want Chloe to grow up thinking this is all life can be," he said. "But I also don't want her to think someone's coming to rescue her. No one ever rescued me." Vivian stepped closer. The click of her heels dulled on the kitchen tile. "Maybe that's why you became her hero. Because you had to learn to fight with no one in your corner." He blinked slowly. "And what if I don't know how to be anything else?" "Then we figure it out," she said. Together, Ethan studied her. This woman who had nothing to gain by being here. No angle, no hidden motive. Just presence. Real, steady, terrifyingly honest presence. Chloe stirred in the next room, letting out a sleepy sigh that made Ethan glance toward the hallway. He suddenly felt the weight of everything again. Fatherhood, pride, uncertainty. The sheer impossibility of this moment happening at all. When he looked back, Vivian hadn't moved. She was still there, still waiting. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel like running. Vivian didn't stay much longer. The clock had crept past midnight, and even in the dim warmth of the kitchen, the hour weighed heavy. Ethan walked her to the door, not because he felt obligated, but because he wasn't quite ready for her to leave. There was a stillness in the apartment now, Chloe asleep, the city outside muffled by old windows, and in that stillness, something raw lingered between them. She stood at the threshold, her coat draped over one arm, not yet shrugging it on. Ethan opened the door, the night air slipping in, cool and sharp. Vivian didn't step through it right away. "You sure you're okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "With everything from tonight?" He gave a slow nod. "I'm more okay than I've been in a while, which is new. His lips curved into something softer than a smile. "Good." Ethan shifted his weight. "You didn't have to walk into our night like that." "I know, but I'm glad I did." She met his eyes, and for the briefest moment neither of them looked away. There was no dramatic music, no sweeping gesture, just the quiet pulse of something real, beginning to grow roots. Vivian reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a card, matte black, simple lettering. No company logo, just her name, her number. She held it out to him. "Call me," she said, her voice steady. "Not because you owe me, but because I'd like to see you again." Ethan took it slowly, brushing her fingers by accident. Or maybe not. He glanced down at the card, then up again. "You always make a habit of inviting strangers into your world?" "Only the ones who don't ask for anything," she said. "Those are the ones worth knowing." She stepped into the hallway then, heels echoing down the narrow corridor. Ethan watched until the lift doors closed and her silhouette disappeared. He stood there for a moment longer, the door still open, the card in his hand. Then he looked down the hall, whispered to no one in particular. What the hell just happened? And slowly, quietly, he closed the door behind him. What do you think Ethan will do next? Will he call Vivian? Let us know your predictions in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unexpected stories. The call that changed everything. The next morning came too early. Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee, staring at the black card Vivian had given him. It sat there between his hands like it weighed 10 pounds. Just a name, a number, simple, clean. Everything about her was clean, intentional. And here he was, sitting in the same wrinkled shirt from last night, sleep-deprived, with grease already under his nails from checking Chloe's busted bike chain before school. He'd dropped her off an hour ago. She had walked into that building with her head a little higher, her smile a little brighter. Last night had done something to her. It gave her a glimpse of something she hadn't had in a long time, maybe ever. Magic, possibility, belonging. But for Ethan, that magic had turned into a quiet storm this morning. He felt like he was standing between two lives, the one he knew how to survive, and the one Vivian had cracked open in front of him, if only for a night. He turned the card over in his hands again. Part of him wanted to call, to see her again, to know if what he felt wasn't just some illusion built on adrenaline and gratitude. But another part, the louder part, warned him not to mistake kindness for something more. People like Vivian didn't just appear and stick around. People like Vivian had lives full of boardrooms, drivers, wine that didn't come with twist caps. He glanced at his phone. No messages. Not that he expected any. Still, he couldn't bring himself to throw the card away. The buzz of the garage door opening downstairs snapped him out of his thoughts. Back to reality. Back to timing belt replacements and rusted mufflers. Back to where the world made sense. Ethan slid the card into his wallet, behind an old picture of Chloe in her Halloween mechanic costume. He told himself it didn't mean anything, just a way to keep it safe. But something inside him knew better. It wasn't the end of that night. It was just the pause between scenes. The garage was already buzzing when Ethan arrived. The scent of oil and exhaust clung to the walls like wallpaper, familiar and grounding. Ben, the shop owner and longtime friend, looked up from under the hood of a '94 pickup and gave Ethan a nod that said more than words ever could. There was no small talk between them in the mornings, just engines and time. Ethan changed into his overalls in the back room, letting the metal zipper draw a line between last night and today. But even as he reached for his tools, Vivian's voice lingered in his head. Her calm, her clarity. The way she had stood up in that restaurant like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she'd done it 100 times before. He shook it off, wrenched his focus into the job. A busted alternator. He dove into the work with precision, his body remembering what his thoughts kept interrupting. But his rhythm was off. He stripped a bolt, cut his knuckle. Nothing deep but enough to sting, to remind him that real life didn't pause for fairy tales. By lunchtime, he'd had enough. He stepped out into the alley behind the garage, the cold biting against the sweat still clinging to the back of his neck. He lit a cigarette, his first in weeks, and leaned against the wall, staring at the cracked pavement like it might give him answers. The truth was, he hadn't stopped thinking about her. Not once. Not since the door closed behind her the night before. And not just because of what she'd done for Chloe, but because of how she'd looked at him. Not with pity, not with curiosity, but with recognition. As if she saw past the grit and paycheck-to-paycheck existence and found something worth standing next to. He took a long drag and closed his eyes, remembering her voice. "I'm not offering a fairy tale. I'm offering real." The cigarette burned low between his fingers. Ethan pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. The card was still in his wallet. He didn't take it out. Not yet. But for the first time that day, he thought about what it would feel like if he did. 2 days passed. He hadn't called. The card stayed buried in his wallet, like a weight pressed against his conscience, its corners bending just enough to remind him it was still there. Ethan told himself he was busy. He told himself it had been a one-time thing, a moment of kindness, not an invitation. But none of those excuses held up when he caught himself glancing at his phone during lunch or replaying her words at night after Chloe had fallen asleep. That morning a storm rolled in. Gray skies, spitting rain, just cold enough to make everything ache. Ethan stood in the garage doorway, arms crossed, watching water pool beneath the cars in the lot. He'd always liked storms. They matched something in him, something that never quite settled. Ben came up behind him, wiping grease from his hands. You look like a man trying not to do something stupid. Ethan smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm thinking. That's all. Thinking too long's what gets you into trouble, Ben muttered. Whatever it is, you either want it or you don't. But don't sit in the middle like the fence won't break under you. Ethan gave a half laugh. Did you just call me heavy? I called you scared. The words hit harder than expected. Ethan didn't reply. Ben didn't push. He just clapped him once on the shoulder and walked off, disappearing into the steam rising off an overheating sedan. Alone again, Ethan pulled out his phone. He stared at the black card in his wallet, then at the number he'd typed in the Notes app but hadn't saved. His thumb hovered. Then, finally, he tapped. The phone rang once, then twice. He almost hung up. But on the third ring, her voice answered. Calm. Warm. Just as steady as he remembered. Hello? Ethan didn't speak right away. There was a pause, and then, It's me, he said. Ethan. A beat. I was hoping you'd call, she replied. And with those 5 words, something inside him shifted. Because, for the first time in a long time, someone had waited and hadn't given up. What do you think Vivian's expectations are for this first coffee meeting? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more captivating stories. The first date. Ethan stood in the alley behind the garage, phone still pressed to his ear, heart thudding louder than the rain hammering the metal roof above. Her voice had cracked something open in him, something he hadn't let anyone near in years. He wasn't sure what he expected when he finally called. Maybe voicemail, maybe a polite brush-off. But she'd answered like she'd been waiting, like he hadn't taken too long. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me, he admitted, trying to keep his tone even. But it betrayed him. Too honest. Too raw. I did, Vivian said, and I do. He didn't know what to say to that. Words never came easy for him. When they mattered most. So he let the silence hang for a second, gave it the space to breathe. I've been thinking about that night, she continued. About the way you looked when they turned you away, and the way you carried her in your arms like the world had no right to see her cry. Ethan stared down at the slick pavement, rainwater collecting in shallow puddles, reflecting the faded neon from the diner across the street. You saw too much, he said quietly. People usually don't look that close. I do. A beat passed. Then another. I don't know what this is, Ethan said, or if it's even anything, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. About you. Her voice softened. Then let's stop thinking. Let's start with coffee. Tomorrow? Noon? He almost said yes without hesitation. But the mechanic in him, the man trained to double-check every moving part, made him pause. Coffee, he repeated. That's it? For now, she said, a playful edge to her voice. Unless you show up in a tux, then we'll talk about dinner. He laughed, and it caught him off guard. It had been a long time since something sounded that natural leaving his mouth. I'll be there, he said. Good, she replied. I'll bring the questions. You bring the answer. And just like that, the call ended. But the storm inside him had quieted, at least for now. The morning crept in gray and slow, dragging its heels across the sky like it wasn't quite ready to commit. Ethan stood in front of the bathroom mirror, razor in one hand, doubt in the other. He hadn't shaved clean in weeks, months maybe. He'd told himself it was because he was too busy, but really it was armor. The scruff, the work boots, the worn flannel, they all said the same thing. I'm fine without the world's approval. But now, as he stared at his reflection, that armor felt heavier than usual. Vivian hadn't asked him to be anyone else, but the thought of showing up still looking like a man who never left his garage didn't sit right. He scraped the blade slowly along his jaw, letting each stroke strip away more than just stubble. By the time he finished, his face looked unfamiliar, sharper, younger, more exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed in a long time. Chloe padded into the kitchen while he brewed coffee, rubbing sleep from her eyes, hair a wild halo around her face. She blinked when she saw him. "You look weird," she said flatly, yawning mid-sentence. "Thanks," he chuckled. "Nice to see you too." She sat at the table and squinted. "Are you going on a date?" His back stiffened, pouring coffee a little too quickly into his mug. "It's just coffee." "With that fancy lady?" He paused, then turned. "Yeah, with her." Chloe tilted her head. "Do you like her?" Ethan sat across from her, stirring sugar into his cup, just to keep his hands moving. "I think I do, but I'm not sure if I should." "Why not?" She was 10 years old, and already better at cutting through excuses than most adults. He thought about how she'd looked at Vivian that night, how easily she'd laughed in her presence, how safe she'd seemed. "Because sometimes things that feel good don't stay," he said. Chloe shrugged, unconcerned. "Sometimes they do, and He gave her a long look, then stood and kissed the top of her head. "Don't grow up too fast, okay?" "I won't," she mumbled, already stealing bites from his toast. Ethan grabbed his jacket, checked the mirror one last time, and left before he could talk himself out of it. The cafe was nothing like the Gilded Spoon where they first met. No chandeliers, no velvet booths, or maitre d's guarding the door. Just the soft hum of conversation, the hiss of milk frothing, and the scent of cinnamon drifting from pastries behind the glass. It was the kind of place where nobody wore a suit, unless they had somewhere else to be after. Ethan liked that. He arrived early. 15 minutes, maybe 20. He sat near the window, hands wrapped around a warm ceramic mug he hadn't touched, his eyes flicking up every time the door opened. A woman with red curls, a man in a leather jacket, a mother with 2 kids. None of them were her. Then she walked in. Vivian moved with the same quiet confidence she always had, but this time it wasn't wrapped in luxury. No evening gown, no heels that clicked, just jeans, a slate gray coat, and a scarf loosely draped around her neck. And somehow she still looked like the most composed person in the room. Ethan stood as she approached, awkward at first, unsure of the rules in this new setting. She gave him a smile, and just like that, the tension dropped from his shoulders. "I wasn't sure you'd show," he admitted as they sat. "I told you I would," she said simply, as if her word carried more weight than doubt. The barista came by, and Vivian ordered a cappuccino. They made small talk at first. Weather, work, Chloe's school project about the solar system. But Ethan could feel something else brewing underneath, something heavier. She hadn't come for the croissants. Finally, Vivian set down her cup and leaned forward. "I've been thinking about you," she said, and the words landed between them like a match striking concrete. He looked down at his hands, thumbs tracing the rim of his mug. "That's dangerous." "Maybe, but I don't regret it." He met her eyes then, really met them. There was no game, no agenda, just 2 people in a quiet cafe, trying to find out if what they felt in the storm of one night could survive the calm of daylight. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't thinking about the exit. He was thinking about staying. Do you think this is the beginning of something real for Ethan and Vivian? What do you hope happens next? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the next part of their story. Building something real. Vivian's honesty rattled something in him, not because he didn't believe her, but because part of him did. Too much. Ethan stared at the half-empty coffee mug in front of him, like it held some kind of answer. Like if he stared long enough, He'd figure out how to be the kind of man who deserved this moment. "I don't know what you want from me," he said finally, his voice low, steady. "I fix cars, not people. I don't throw dinner parties. I can't talk stocks or travel or wine that doesn't come in a box." Vivian leaned back slightly, not in retreat, but to see him more clearly. "Do you think that's why I'm here?" He didn't answer. She let the silence sit, but not long enough to let it rot. "I've been around a lot of people with power, influence, money. They fill rooms with noise and never say anything that matters. But you," she paused, choosing her words, "you didn't try to impress me. You didn't want anything from me. That night, when everything could have broken you in front of your daughter, you stood tall. That's rare, Ethan. That's real." He swallowed hard. She was making it harder to hide behind the version of himself he'd constructed for survival. The guarded, quiet, no time for feelings mechanic. The single dad who didn't ask for help, didn't need anyone's approval. That armor didn't hold up well under someone like her. "You make it sound like I'm some kind of saint," he muttered. "You're not," she said, and there was a softness in the bite. "You're flawed, defensive, a little stubborn." He looked up, half smirking. "A little?" Vivian smiled, but it faded just enough to show she was serious again. "I don't need a saint, Ethan. I need someone real, someone I don't have to pretend around, someone who doesn't disappear when things get complicated." He sat back, exhaled through his nose. "Complicated's all I've got. Then maybe I've been looking in the wrong places." She said it without flinching. No drama, no performance, just truth. And that, more than anything, made him want to believe this wasn't some passing spark. It was something stronger, something worth burning for. The walk back to his truck was quiet, not uncomfortable, just full. The kind of silence that said more than words could. Vivian walked beside him, her hands tucked into her coat pockets, her hair catching the wind in soft, uncontrolled strands. Ethan kept glancing over, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he was afraid if he spoke, it would break whatever strange, fragile balance they'd found. When they reached his truck, parked beneath a bare tree with wind-blown leaves gathered at its tires, he hesitated at the door. The sunlight bounced off the windscreen, a cold glare. He looked down at the chipped paint, the cracked mirror, the seat with the tear he kept meaning to patch. It was the opposite of everything she'd walked toward in her world. He turned to her, one hand on the door handle. "You sure you're not slumming it?" Vivian didn't smile. She stepped closer until the distance between them was breath and intention. "Don't insult what this is," she said quietly, "and don't insult yourself." The words knocked something loose in his chest. He'd spent so long preparing for rejection, wearing it like armor before anyone else could choose it first. It was easier to assume she'd leave than to imagine she might stay. But she wasn't backing off. She wasn't sugarcoating either. She was just here. "You ever feel like the world built itself with two doors?" he asked suddenly. "One for people like you, one for people like me." Vivian shook her head. "The world didn't build the doors. People did, and people can tear them down." Her conviction was quiet, but ironclad. It unnerved him more than it comforted him, because it meant he had a choice. And choices came with risk. "You scare the hell out of me," he said honestly. "Good," she replied, without hesitation. "Because you scare me too." Then she leaned in, pressed a kiss to his cheek. Not rushed, not flirtatious, just real, solid, like a promise. "I'll call you," she said, turning to leave. Ethan stood there watching her go, her footsteps fading on the pavement. And for once, he didn't feel left behind. He felt chosen. Do you think Vivian will truly call Ethan? Or is this just another moment of fleeting connection? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more amazing stories. A choice made. The next week unfolded like something unfamiliar, quiet but alive with possibility. Every day was the same on the surface. Ethan woke up early, made Chloe's lunch, opened the garage, and got his hands dirty fixing other people's problems. But under the grease and repetition, something had shifted. He started checking his phone more than he wanted to admit. Vivian hadn't called yet, and he hadn't called her either. It wasn't a game. It was fear dressed as patience. Part of him thought she was giving him space. The other part wondered if maybe she was already walking away, just doing it gently this time. By Thursday, he was pacing the garage between jobs, tools untouched, half listening to Chloe chatter about science projects and how her teacher smelled like onions. She was happy. Her world was steady. Ethan wanted to believe his could be too. But that evening, while closing up the shop, the door creaked open and shattered every doubt. Vivian stood in the doorway wearing a simple black coat, her hair pulled back, no makeup, nothing like the polished version of her he'd seen that first night. And yet she looked more herself than ever. Ethan blinked. "You said you'd call." "I know," she said, stepping inside, "but I thought this would say more." He didn't speak right away. He wiped his hands on a rag, heart racing against his better judgment. "I've been thinking," she continued, "about what happens when people from different worlds collide, about how easy it is to assume they'll just bounce off each other and keep moving." Ethan nodded slowly, "Because they usually do. But I don't want to," she said. "I want to see what happens if we stop bouncing and try building." He looked down, then back at her. "You sure you're ready for all that comes with me? It's not glamorous." "I'm not looking for glamorous," she said. "I'm looking for something honest." He took a slow breath, the kind that felt like surrender and acceptance all at once. Then he stepped forward, just enough to close the space between them, and quietly said, "Then let's build." What do you think building will look like for Ethan and Vivian? Share your hopes and predictions in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for the amazing conclusion. Building a new reality. The first time Vivian stepped fully into the garage, grease on the floor and the sharp tang of oil in the air, Ethan braced himself. It was one thing for her to visit him in a cafe where the air smelled like cinnamon and the noise was soft and forgettable. It was another to step into his world, the world of clanking metal, stained rags, and the kind of silence only broken by busted engines and frustrated sighs. But she didn't flinch, didn't hover near the entrance, or glance down at her shoes like she didn't want to ruin them. Instead, she walked past the lifted truck, past the rolling tool cabinets, and stood beside him like she'd done it 100 times before. "This place," she said, looking around. "It's you." Ethan wiped his hands on a towel, smearing more oil than he removed. "It's messy." "So are people," she replied. He chuckled, but there was no hiding the hesitation in his posture. "You're not going to find wine racks or imported countertops here." "I didn't come here for countertops." She reached out then, picking up a photo taped to the rusted mini-fridge. It was a faded picture of Chloe, maybe 5 years old, standing on a milk crate, holding a wrench too big for her hands, grinning like she'd just rebuilt a jet engine. "She loves this place," Vivian said. Ethan watched her carefully. "It's the only place she's ever really known." "Then maybe it's time people stopped trying to measure its worth by what it doesn't have." He turned away, pretending to tidy tools that didn't need tidying. "It's just hard to believe someone like you wants to be part of this." "Why?" she asked, walking toward him. "Because I wear heels sometimes? Because my world looks different? Because your world doesn't need me," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "No," she said, stepping closer. "But I want you in it." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and a confession rolled into one. And for once, Ethan didn't argue. He just nodded and let her stay. The first time Vivian met Chloe outside the glow of candles and white linen, It was on a Saturday morning, just past 8. Ethan had warned her Chloe was full tilt by sunrise, especially on weekends. No filter, no brake pedal, just boundless energy and questions fired off like a game show host. Vivian knocked on the apartment door with a small bag in her hand. Books? A puzzle? Something she'd grabbed last minute because she wasn't sure what 10-year-olds were into, but she didn't want to show up empty-handed. Ethan opened the door in a faded hoodie, coffee already in hand, looking like he'd been awake since dawn. "Hey," he said, a little too quietly, eyes scanning her face. "You sure about this?" She smiled. Only one way to find out. Before he could say another word, Chloe came skidding into view in socks that had long lost their grip. "Dad, someone's at the—" She stopped when she saw Vivian. Her face lit up, confused but excited. "Wait, I know you." "You do," Vivian said, kneeling slightly. "We shared chocolate cake." Chloe stepped forward slowly, assessing her like someone inspecting a piece of machinery. Curious, skeptical, fearless. "Are you here for breakfast or to hang out with me?" Vivian laughed. "Both, if that's okay." Ethan watched them like he was seeing something impossible unfold. Like the two parts of his life he'd always kept separate were suddenly speaking the same language. "I brought this," Vivian said, holding out the puzzle box. "It might be boring. I wasn't sure." Chloe took it, studied the cover, then nodded with the seriousness of a surgeon. "No, this is good. You picked a hard one. Only smart people go for hard puzzles." Vivian raised an eyebrow at Ethan. "I've been evaluated. She's thorough," he said. For the next hour, the apartment filled with the soft sounds of puzzle pieces being turned over, little gasps of discovery, and Chloe's running commentary on everything from unicorns to outer space. Ethan didn't say much. He just watched from the kitchen, coffee in hand, heart somewhere between his throat and the floor, because somehow Vivian hadn't just stepped into his life. She was fitting into it. That night, after Chloe had finally collapsed into bed, surrounded by puzzle pieces she refused to put away until morning, Ethan stood at the window with the lights off, the city glowing dimly through streaked glass. Vivian stood beside him, her reflection faint in the pain, close enough that her shoulder brushed his. They didn't speak at first. The silence between them had changed. It wasn't nervous or charged anymore. It was full of something quieter, something heavier. "I've never let anyone that close to her," Ethan said, his voice almost a whisper. "Not since her mom." Vivian didn't turn her head. "I figured as much. She left when Chloe was 3. Said she didn't sign up for a life that small. Packed a bag in the middle of the night, and never looked back." There was no anger in his voice, just exhaustion, a quiet grief that had dried into something more solid over the years. "She never even called," he added. Vivian placed her hand over his on the windowsill. Her touch was light, but it steadied something inside him. He looked down at their hands, at the contrast, the scars on his knuckles, the polish on her nails. It should have felt like a mismatch. It didn't. "You don't have to be her replacement," he said. "You don't owe us anything." "I'm not here to fill a space," she replied. "I'm here because I choose to be, and that means I'll show up even when it's messy." Ethan turned to face her then. His expression was unreadable, eyes darker in the low light. "You sure?" he asked. "Because I can't promise this won't fall apart. I'm not always easy to carry." Vivian stepped closer, her hand moving to his chest, resting lightly over his heart. "I don't want easy," she said. "I want real." Then she rose on her toes and kissed him, slow, unhurried, with the kind of quiet certainty that said, this wasn't the start of something fragile. It was the beginning of something strong. And for the first time in years, Ethan didn't brace for the moment she'd leave. He braced for the moment she'd stay. What do you think this new, real will look like for Ethan, Vivian, and Chloe? Share your hopes and dreams for their future in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to follow their journey.